The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and unyielding, in the back corridors of the Buncombe County Animal Control Center, just outside Asheville. Every footstep echoed off the concrete, as if the building itself wanted to remind its inhabitants of their captivity. In the last row of the holding stalls, past yapping dogs and cowering cats, stood a single black horse, alone, statuesque, with eyes that refused to blink. His name, once said with admiration, was now spoken only in anxious whispers. Midnight. A faded sign on his stall door read, "Aggressive, failed, unadoptable." Underneath, in smaller script, someone had added, "Caution." Staff passed his stall with quick glances, muttering, "That horse is crazy, stay away." But Midnight didn't flinch. He just stared into space, motionless, breath misting in the frigid air. His black mane had lost its luster, tail limp and muddied from months without sunlight. If hope ever lived in his chest, it had been choked out long ago, replaced by the slow suffocation of loneliness. It was nearly midnight, and the Animal Control Center should have been still. But tonight was different. Tonight was public viewing day, the last chance for any animal in the facility to find a home. Tomorrow at noon, those who hadn't been claimed would meet a silent, final fate. Paperwork and protocol, no ceremony, no tears. There were always a few last-minute adoptions, but no one came for the broken ones. No one came for Midnight. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open. The sounds of voices, hopeful, anxious, resigned, filtered through the halls as families peered into cages. Children pointed and asked, "Can we take this one?" The air buzzed with a strange energy, half anticipation, half dread. But Midnight stood still, unmoved. The thrum of his heart, if it existed, was hidden deep beneath his battered chest. Hoofbeats echoed in the empty space as a janitor's mop accidentally struck the metal bars of the next stall. Midnight didn't react. 2 teenage volunteers walked past, their laughter dying when they reached his door. One shivered. "That's the one they said used to be a hero, right?" The other replied, "Yeah, for the police, now look at him." The words hung heavy, thick with judgment and fear. Time stretched in that narrow stall. The horse's breath came slower, his eyes hollow. For the people who worked at the center, Midnight was already a ghost, something between a warning and a burden. Nobody talked about the incident. Nobody wanted to remember what happened the night he returned, wild-eyed and wounded, dragging a broken saddle, the police unit's crest slashed by what looked like a knife. Rumors swirled, but the truth was locked away, just like the horse. The clock ticked closer to closing. One by one, the lights in the hallway clicked off. Volunteers packed up. Staff began their final rounds. The animals grew restless, sensing the shift, except for Midnight, whose world had shrunk to the size of his stall, whose future narrowed to a single, silent outcome. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, whether anyone cared or not. But in that moment, with the world settling into darkness, the story was not finished. Far from it. In the waiting area, a woman in her late 20s clutched a worn folder to her chest, knuckles white, jaw clenched with determination and exhaustion. Rachel Evans had not slept in 2 nights. Her red hair was tangled, pulled back in a loose bun. She wore jeans and an old denim jacket that had belonged to her brother Chris. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rise and fall of her breath, grounding herself in the memory of the brother she had lost, the one who had ridden that black Morgan horse through the streets of Asheville, beaming with pride. Rachel's job as a therapist had vanished 3 weeks ago. Bills piled up at home. But the pain that kept her awake wasn't just about money. It was about the unanswered questions, the nightmares, and the silence from the police department after Chris disappeared. When Rachel saw a notice online about a horse up for adoption, the horse Chris had called his guardian angel, she felt something old and fierce stir in her chest. She couldn't say why, but she had to see him. She gave her name to the front desk. The clerk frowned, warning her, "Ma'am, I don't recommend getting close to that horse. He's dangerous. He's not like the others." Rachel just nodded, words tight. "I'd like to see him anyway." She stepped past the desk, heart pounding. As she reached Midnight's stall, Rachel paused. The smell of antiseptic and damp hay clung to the air. Midnight, hearing footsteps, didn't turn. She watched him for a moment. The way his sides barely moved. How his ears didn't flick at her presence. Her eyes stung with tears, but she forced them back. She took a slow step forward, speaking softly. "You kept Chris safe. You're not just another number." The words trembled in the sterile space. For the first time all night, Midnight moved. He stretched his neck out, nostrils flaring, eyes glistening with a spark of recognition. Or was it desperation? For a moment, Rachel imagined he remembered her brother's scent. The afternoons spent riding, the bond forged in sweat and laughter. A staff member tried to intervene. "Miss, please, he's not safe." But Rachel ignored them, reaching her hand out, palm up. Her heart thudded in her ears. Midnight took another step. Their breaths mingled in the cold. He touched her hand with his nose, a gentle, trembling gesture. Rachel smiled, a real, broken smile for the first time in months. "Hey there. I'm here now." She pressed her forehead against the bars. Midnight didn't shy away. Behind them, the hallway grew quiet. The world outside the stall faded. Just Rachel and Midnight in the center of a quiet storm. For one suspended moment, hope flickered in the darkness, a spark between the condemned and the determined. Midnight was not alone anymore. Rachel sat alone in the narrow conference room of the Animal Control Center, paperwork spread out before her like a battlefield. The walls felt closer now, suffocating in their silence. Through the grimy window, she could see the parking lot bathed in pale orange light, night creeping across Asheville's outskirts. Every so often, she heard a distant dog bark or the clang of metal gates as workers shuffled animals back into their cages for the night. But one sound drowned out all others in her mind. The heavy, sorrowful sigh of Midnight echoing down the hall. "Miss Evans, I need you to sign here, if you're sure," said the manager, pushing a stack of forms her way. His eyes darted up, half pleading, half incredulous. "I have to remind you again that Midnight is considered a risk. We don't know exactly what happened that night. But since then, he's never been the same. He doesn't let anyone near him. There have been incidents, minor injuries, a few spooked volunteers, and he refuses food for days at a time. I'm just saying this isn't like adopting a puppy. There are responsibilities." Rachel's fingers trembled. Her mind replayed every warning, every doubt, every desperate hope that had led her here. She thought of Chris's laughter, the way his uniform always seemed brighter when he came home smelling of leather and hay, talking about the horse who could sense trouble before any human did. She remembered her brother's last words before he disappeared. "Take care of them, Rach. Some souls need saving." He had meant people, but now it felt like something bigger. Maybe this was the sign she'd been searching for in all those sleepless nights. She pressed the pen to the page. "I'm sure," she said, voice steady, final. The manager sighed, resigning himself to the paperwork. "You'll need a special trailer, and we'll need to review your property, standard protocol. But if you're really set on this, he's yours. I wish you luck, Miss Evans. You'll need it." Minutes later, Rachel followed an attendant down the quiet corridor. Midnight's stall loomed at the end, shadows thick as molasses. The attendant hesitated, fumbling with the latch. He doesn't let anyone halter him anymore. I can try. Rachel shook her head. Let me. She stepped up to the bars, her movements deliberate, gentle. Midnight's ears twitched, but he didn't retreat. Rachel spoke in a low murmur, voice trembling with old affection and new resolve. Hey, I know you're scared, so am I. But we're getting out of here, you and me. She held out her hand, palm open. Please, let's go home. Midnight's nostrils quivered as he took in her scent. A long, tense pause. Then, impossibly, he stretched his neck forward, letting her slip the halter over his head. The staff gawked. One whispered, "No one's done that in months." Rachel led Midnight into the corridor. His hooves clattered against the floor, the sound sharp, defiant. For the first time in a long while, he didn't resist. He followed, as if recognizing something in Rachel he hadn't seen in anyone else. Staff members cleared a path, some murmuring words of warning, others just staring, caught off guard by the quiet miracle unfolding in front of them. Outside, the night air hit them like a balm. Midnight lifted his head, nostrils flaring, drinking in the smells of damp grass and distant woods. For a second, Rachel saw the horse Chris had always described, a hero's steed, proud and unbreakable. But then his eyes clouded again, and he pressed close to Rachel's side, as if afraid she might disappear too. They loaded Midnight into Rachel's borrowed trailer, a rusty old thing that rattled at every bump. She drove slow, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, stealing glances in the rearview mirror. Midnight stood silently, head bowed. Rachel talked to him as she drove, her words spilling out in a torrent, as if she could fill the holes in both their hearts with sheer determination. It's okay now. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. I promise, Midnight. Whatever happened, you're not alone anymore. She pulled up to her family's farm, run down, but still standing after all these years. Moonlight cast silver shadows across the overgrown yard. Midnight stepped out of the trailer, hooves sinking into familiar North Carolina earth. For a moment, he simply stood, inhaling the scents of wildflowers and old hay. Then, suddenly, he jerked his head, nostrils wide, eyes darting over the fence line. Rachel watched, heart in her throat. Would he bolt? Would he freeze instead? Midnight walked slowly to the edge of the pasture, Rachel following close. The barn door creaked in the wind. An owl called from the distant woods. Rachel leaned on the fence and waited. Midnight circled, restless, as if searching for something he'd lost long ago. He let out a soft, mournful whinny, softer than she expected, broken and full of longing. Rachel crouched beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. You kept Chris safe. I know you did. I don't care what they say. She reached out, not daring to hope, but needing to try. Midnight met her halfway, his nose finding her palm again. For a heartbeat, they were both suspended in the space between fear and trust. Inside the house, Rachel's phone buzzed. Her mother, her friends, people wanting to know why she'd risk everything for a crazy horse. She let it go to voicemail. Out in the dark, Rachel and Midnight had found something more important than answers. Fragile, aching connection. The first step on the long road home. From her spot on the grass, Rachel watched the stars appear one by one, the night stretching on, thick with promise and threat. Tomorrow would bring questions, judgment, maybe danger. But for now, Rachel pressed her forehead to Midnight's, closing her eyes, breathing in the moment neither of them thought they'd ever have again. In the silence, Rachel whispered, "We're going to make it. I won't give up on you." Midnight closed his eyes and stood still, letting hope flicker quietly, almost invisible, but alive. The road to Rachel's family farm curved through dense North Carolina woods and ended at a battered mailbox, its red flag faded by sun and rain. Rachel guided Midnight's trailer up the gravel drive, headlights sweeping across the weathered boards of the old farmhouse and the sagging barn behind it. Crickets sang from the grass, their chorus wrapping around Rachel and Midnight as she cut the engine and sat in the quiet. She could barely remember the last time the place had felt like home. Midnight stepped out slowly, hooves sinking into the loamy ground. He paused, taking in the scents of pine needles and rain-damp earth, ears flicking at every distant sound. Rachel led him to the barn, but he balked at the door, muscles bunching, whites of his eyes flashing in the moonlight. For a moment, he stood frozen, every line of his body tense. Then, as Rachel tried to coax him inside, Midnight whirled and trotted to the far fence, pacing back and forth along the wire as if searching for escape. Rachel watched, her heart aching. He refused to enter the barn, refused even to stand in the paddock. Instead, he kept to the shadows at the edge of the property, never still for long. At night, his whinnies echoed across the fields, low, haunting, searching. Rachel sat by the fence with a flashlight, bundled in Chris's old jacket, telling stories to the restless dark. She spoke of their childhood, bare feet in the creek, their secret hideout in the hayloft. The day Chris brought home Midnight, still young, wild, and shining with promise. Sometimes in the early morning, Rachel found Midnight standing by the back fence, eyes fixed on the horizon. Other times, she'd find him circling the pasture restlessly, head tossing, tail lashing at invisible ghosts. She wondered what memories haunted him, what loss pressed in on his ribs each time the wind changed. She saw it in his posture, in the way he started at shadows, in the way he never settled. A week passed. Rachel's savings dwindled, the days blurring together with the exhaustion of grief and responsibility. Her phone was filled with voicemails from friends urging her to come back to the city, to let go of the past. She ignored them, feeling pulled by something deeper, something old and unfinished. Every evening, she returned to Midnight's side, sitting in the grass, her voice a lifeline in the quiet. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she just listened to the rhythmic sound of his hooves, the only answer he seemed willing to give. On the fourth night, a thunderstorm rolled in, the sky rumbling, rain lashing at the windows. Rachel raced outside as the first fat drops fell, flashlight bobbing through the darkness. She found Midnight by the fence, sides heaving, flanks slick with rain. He shied away at first, but Rachel didn't back down. She moved slowly, speaking softly, until she was close enough to touch his shoulder. Midnight trembled, but as the thunder cracked above, he finally rested his head against Rachel's arm. His breath warm and shaky, Shunao stroked his soaked mane, tears mingling with the rain. "I know it hurts. I know you miss him," she whispered, voice breaking in the storm, "but you're not alone. Not anymore." Midnight stood still, as if drawing strength from her touch, the first fragile bond forming between two survivors, neither willing to give up. Days later, while cleaning out the tack room, Rachel stumbled upon an old saddle buried under a pile of rotting hay. The leather was scarred, the police crest slashed and faded, but there was something wedged deep in the lining. Rachel's hands shook as she pulled out a battered police badge, its edges singed, numbers barely legible. Tucked behind the badge was a folded note, paper brittle and yellowed by time. Her name was written across the front in Chris's hurried scrawl. She read the note 3 times before she could make sense of the words. Rach, if something happens to me, take care of Midnight. He's seen more than anyone knows. Trust him, even when it gets hard. Don't trust the stories they'll tell about that night. Some things don't add up. If you're reading this, I'm sorry. Look after Mom. Love you always, Chris. Rachel sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. The words pressed heavy against her chest, filling her with dread and hope all at once. She read the note again, running her fingers over the creases, trying to find answers in the spaces between the lines. What had Chris meant about that night? What had really happened to her brother and to Midnight on Chris's last patrol? Holding the badge and the letter, Rachel walked out to the pasture. Midnight was waiting at the fence, ears pricked, watching her approach. She knelt beside him, badge in one hand, letter in the other. "Did you see what happened, boy? Did you try to warn him?" Midnight stared at her, unblinking, as if guarding secrets too painful to share. As the sun set behind the trees, Rachel pressed her forehead to Midnight's and let the questions tumble out. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I miss him so much. But I think you do too." Midnight let out a low, rumbling sigh, nudging her gently, as if telling her not to give up. For the first time, Rachel felt hope flutter in her chest, fragile but alive. Later, as she drifted to sleep on the old sofa, the letter and badge clutched to her heart. Rachel dreamed of her brother's laughter, of Midnight running free beneath endless skies. She woke before dawn, the dream already fading, but one thing remained, a promise to keep searching, no matter where the shadows led. The morning after the storm, the world seemed quieter, washed clean by the night's violence. Rachel woke early, the faded letter still clutched in her hand. She lay on the worn couch for a moment, letting sunlight filter through the blinds, warming her face. Midnight was already awake, standing in the far pasture, coat glistening with dew. He moved with a restlessness Rachel was beginning to recognize. Not fear, but an unease that never left him. The badge and letter weighed heavily in her pocket as she poured herself a mug of stale coffee. There was no peace in this place. Not yet. She needed answers, and there was only one person she trusted to help her get them. Dr. Lena Carter had been the Evans family vet since Rachel was a child, long retired but known throughout the county as a legend. She was the one who'd helped Chris train Midnight for the force, teaching him not just the art of control, but the deeper language of trust. Rachel dialed Dr. Carter's number, her hands trembling as she left a message. Within an hour, Lena pulled up in her battered blue truck, the license plate barely hanging on, white hair pulled back in a tight braid. She wore jeans and a plaid shirt, the kind of woman who could outstare a stubborn horse and win every time. "Rachel Evans," Lena said, her voice both gentle and steely as she walked up the porch steps. "I heard you finally brought Midnight home." Rachel managed a weak smile. "I need your help, Dr. Carter. He's not himself. And there's something else." She pressed the battered badge and Chris's letter into Lena's hands. The older woman read in silence, lines deepening on her face. "I was afraid of this," she said, folding the letter. "Let's see the patient." In the barn, dust motes danced in the shafts of light slanting through the gaps in the roof. Rachel led Midnight inside, hesitance clear in every step. Lena clicked her tongue, approaching with a slow, practiced ease. Midnight shifted but didn't rear or bolt. He eyed Lena warily, then, after a moment, allowed her to lay a hand on his shoulder. "Well, you're still a beauty, aren't you?" Lena murmured, running her fingers down Midnight's leg. She crouched low, examining a jagged scar that wrapped around his fetlock. "This isn't a normal wound," she said. "See the pattern? Straight edges, even spacing. This horse had specialized surgery, maybe to repair a tendon or remove a tracker. Not an accident. Somebody did this deliberately, and not gently." Rachel's blood ran cold. "Why would anyone—" She trailed off, voice shaking. Lena glanced up, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Rachel, there's more to Midnight's story than you know. Injuries like this, they don't just happen, especially to police horses. Somebody wanted to erase something. From him. Maybe from Chris, too." Rachel sank onto a bale of hay, mind racing. The words in Chris's letter seemed heavier now, a warning she hadn't fully understood. "I don't know if I can do this, Lena. What if I make things worse? What if I put him in more danger?" Lena sat beside her, resting a comforting hand on Rachel's back. "You're stronger than you think, and so is he." As if on cue, Midnight nudged Rachel's shoulder, his breath warm against her skin. The gesture was gentle, insistent, a silent promise. The barn was quiet, except for the sound of horses breathing and the distant call of a crow. Rachel looked up, finding Midnight's dark eyes fixed on her, full of something she couldn't name. For the first time, she let herself believe that maybe she wasn't alone in her fear. Midnight understood loss, confusion, the ache of betrayal. He was trying, in his own way, to reach her. Lena rose, dusting off her jeans. "If you want my advice, don't ask too many questions in public. Not yet. Trust what Chris left you, and keep Midnight close." She eyed the scar again, then the old police saddle still hanging on a rusty nail. Whatever happened that night, it wasn't an accident. "Be careful, Rachel." After Lena left, Rachel stayed in the barn, the silence pressing in. She thought about Chris, his laughter echoing between the rafters, the way he'd once walked this same ground with confidence and purpose. She closed her eyes, listening for the past in the creak of the boards, the rustle of straw, the gentle snort of the horse by her side. Rachel spent the afternoon cleaning Midnight's stall, her mind turning over every memory, every word Chris had ever said about trust, about courage, about not turning away when things got hard. The barn became a sanctuary, a place where pain and hope mingled, each breath a small act of defiance against the weight of the past. As dusk fell, Rachel sat by Midnight's side, her hand resting on his scarred leg. "I wish I knew what you saw," she whispered, voice trembling. "I wish I knew what really happened to Chris." Midnight lowered his head, pressing his nose to her shoulder. She closed her eyes, letting his presence anchor her, the connection between them stronger now, a lifeline neither was ready to let go. That night, as Rachel watched Midnight doze under the stars, she felt her resolve harden. The past wouldn't let her rest, and she owed it to Chris, and to the horse he'd trusted with his life, to uncover the truth. Even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant facing secrets others wanted buried. In the darkness, Midnight stirred, his ears flicking at sounds only he could hear. Rachel wrapped herself tighter in Chris's jacket and whispered to the night, "I won't stop. I promise." Midnight stood beside her, silent and steadfast, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The days grew shorter, the air sharp with the first hints of autumn. Rachel's nerves were raw, stretched thin by sleepless nights and constant unease. Midnight had grown more protective, his once restless pacing now focused around the farmhouse. He would patrol the perimeter, nostrils flaring, ears pricked at every rustle in the grass or distant engine on the county road. Each night, as Rachel turned out the lights, She caught the glint of his eyes watching over her from beneath the lone oak in the yard. But the farm was no longer the sanctuary it had once been. Strange tracks appeared along the edge of the property, hoof prints too large and fresh to be Midnight's, tire marks pressed into the mud beside the fence. Rachel knelt one morning to study the prints, her heart lurching as she realized someone had ridden, or driven, close, circling the field in the dead of night. Her unease spiked when she found an envelope pinned to the old wooden gate. The note inside was written in blocky, uneven handwriting, words cutting through the morning's calm like a blade. "Let sleeping dogs lie, leave the past alone." Rachel's hands shook as she reread the threat. Her first impulse was to call the sheriff, but something in her gut warned her against it, the same hush that had followed Chris's disappearance, the same official shrugs and averted eyes. She couldn't trust that justice would be done here. Not yet. She stuffed the note deep in her pocket, feeling her courage and fear battling for space in her chest. The days became a blur of vigilance and dread. Rachel took to locking the doors and keeping her phone by her side at all times. She barely slept, every creak of the house making her sit bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. She thought about leaving, about selling the farm, but every time she looked at Midnight, scarred, steadfast, standing guard, she knew she couldn't run. Not now. Not after everything Chris had sacrificed. One evening, as dusk painted the fields in bruised purple and gold, Rachel saw Midnight standing rigid near the barn. His head was up, body tense, ears locked on the far tree line. She hurried outside, her boots sinking into the dew-wet grass. Midnight snorted, muscles rippling under his dark coat, and pawed at the ground. Rachel's skin prickled. She scanned the shadows, every instinct screaming that something was off. A branch snapped near the fence. Rachel froze, breath caught in her throat. For a moment she thought she saw movement, a figure darting between the trees, barely visible in the dying light. "Who's out there?" Her voice was sharp, cutting the silence. No answer, just the wind and the rustle of leaves. Then, suddenly, Midnight let out a shrill, piercing neigh, rearing up, hooves flashing in the air. The figure turned and bolted, melting into the darkness. Rachel fumbled with her phone, trying to capture a photo, but the intruder was gone, leaving only trampled grass and a faint whiff of tobacco smoke lingering in the air. Her heart raced as she led Midnight back toward the barn, her mind spinning with possibilities. Who was watching them? What did they want? And how much did they know about Chris, about that night so many months ago? That night, Rachel sat in the kitchen with the lights off, peering through the window into the blackness beyond. Midnight paced just outside, refusing to leave his post beneath the oak. She dialed her old friend Jake, a fellow Asheville cop, one of Chris's closest confidants. When he answered, she poured out everything, the threats, the tracks, the sense that the past was circling ever closer. Jake's voice was tight, wary. "You're not imagining things, Rach. There's been talk, whispers at the station, people saying the animal case from last year should have been closed, but paperwork keeps going missing. Some folks think Chris stumbled onto something bigger than any of us realized." He paused, then added quietly, "I'll come by tomorrow. Keep the badge and the letter safe. And don't trust anyone you don't know." Rachel thanked him and hung up, her pulse still racing. She turned off her phone and stood by the window, listening to Midnight's steady breathing. She wished she could draw strength from his presence, but fear chewed at her insides. The next morning, Rachel woke to find the barn door ajar, a muddy boot print on the threshold. She ran inside, heart in her throat, but nothing seemed to be missing. Midnight was unharmed, snorting nervously as she checked his stall. She found another envelope on the feed bin, this time empty, save for a single spent bullet. The message was clear. Rachel's hands shook as she fed Midnight, her mind whirling with dread. She knew the threats were real now. Danger pressed in on every side. But Midnight was braver than she, never turning away, never yielding ground. He stood outside her window each night, head high, body poised to defend. The horse everyone had abandoned was now her only protector, his loyalty forged in the crucible of loss and fear. Late that night, as Rachel drifted in and out of restless sleep, a new sound jolted her awake. Midnight's sharp neigh, a warning echoing across the fields. Rachel rushed to the window in time to see a flash of movement near the barn, a figure running hard, stumbling as Midnight charged after him, teeth bared, hooves thundering. The man leapt the fence and vanished into the trees, leaving Rachel breathless with both terror and awe. As dawn crept over the mountains, Rachel found herself standing beside Midnight, hand resting on his damp neck. He leaned into her touch, eyes soft and wise. "We're not alone anymore, are we?" she murmured, voice hoarse with exhaustion and gratitude. Midnight nickered softly, as if to say, "No, not now, not ever." Rachel looked out over the fields, resolve hardening. The past was coming for them, but she would not back down. Not for herself, not for Chris, and not for the horse who refused to abandon her in her darkest hour. The early morning fog clung to the fields like a secret. Rachel poured a mug of bitter coffee and stared at the spent bullet on her kitchen table, the empty envelope beside it. She felt the weight of danger pressing in from every side. Her eyes drifted out the window, where Midnight stood silent beneath the oak, his black coat almost blending with the lingering mist. Something inside Rachel snapped. She couldn't hide anymore. She needed answers, not just for herself, but for Chris, for the horse who refused to let the past die quietly. Rachel slipped Chris's old jacket over her shoulders and drove into Asheville as the sun rose. The city was waking up, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She found Jake in the parking lot of the police precinct, sipping coffee and scanning the street like he was expecting trouble. He greeted her with a tired smile, his face shadowed by worry lines that hadn't been there a year ago. They sat together in his car, windows rolled up tight, Jake's eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few minutes. "You brought the badge and the letter?" he asked. Rachel nodded, handing them over. Jake read Chris's note twice, jaw clenched, then turned the badge over in his hands. "This is damaged. Looks like it was exposed to heat. I remember the night Chris disappeared. He was scheduled for a routine patrol but got a call. Something off the books. Something he never told me about. All he said was he'd be riding Midnight, and he'd be late." Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, then threw a stack of dog-eared case files from his bag. After Chris vanished, the paperwork on his last shift went missing. The department closed the case, said it was a tragic accident, and shipped Midnight off to the animal center as if that would erase everything. But I've always thought there was more. "You said you found this letter in the saddle?" Rachel nodded, her voice hoarse. "It was hidden, like he knew someone would try to cover it up. I need you to help me figure out what happened. Please, Jake, I'm scared, but I can't let this go." Jake studied her face, then sighed. "All right, we'll do it together. But if someone's threatening you, you have to promise to be careful." They spent hours combing through old reports, retracing Chris's final steps. Jake dug up a dusty logbook that showed Chris and Midnight had responded to a call about a disturbance near the industrial yards on the edge of town. The same night, a warehouse fire had gutted half the block. The official report said it was an accident, no foul play. But in the margins, someone had scribbled, "Exotic animal crates, police horse spooked, Officer Evans MIA." Rachel's hands trembled as she read the words. Jake's jaw tightened. There were rumors back then, whispers about illegal exotic animal trade coming through Asheville. Nobody wanted to touch it. Too dangerous. Too many powerful people involved. He scrolled through police emails, finally finding a flagged message. If anyone asks, file Evans' case as unsolved. No further investigation. Orders from above. Rachel's pulse raced. So they just let it go? They never even tried to find Chris? Jake's eyes flashed. Some of us did. But the chief shut us down. He said it was a closed case. Midnight was written off as damaged goods after that night. But he wasn't crazy, he was traumatized. He saw something he wasn't supposed to. They dug deeper, piecing together timelines and witness statements. Rachel's heart pounded as Jake pointed out a familiar name. James Foster, the warehouse owner, who had donated thousands to the city's police charity, but had also been under quiet investigation for smuggling rare animals. Rachel remembered the scar on Midnight's leg, the way Dr. Carter had said it was deliberate, not accidental. Suddenly, Jake's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, his face darkening as he listened. After a tense moment, he hung up, jaw tight. That was a warning. Someone knows we're looking. Rachel swallowed hard. What do we do now? Jake looked at her, determination burning in his eyes. We keep going. We just have to be smarter about it. They left the station through a side door, careful to avoid the main lobby where too many eyes might be watching. Back at Rachel's farm, the wind had picked up, scattering dry leaves across the yard. Midnight met Rachel at the gate, nuzzling her shoulder as if to say he understood the stakes. Rachel buried her face in his mane, the smell of hay and earth grounding her. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, clutching Chris's badge, replaying every memory she had of her brother. She remembered the way he'd talk to Midnight after long shifts, the secret smile he wore when he thought no one was looking. She whispered into the darkness, "I'm going to find the truth, Chris. I promise." As the clock crept past midnight, Rachel heard footsteps crunching in the gravel outside. She froze, heart thundering. Midnight stood in the moonlight, neck arched, muscles tense. A shadow slipped past the fence. Someone watching, waiting. Rachel's phone buzzed with an ominous text. "Stop digging, or you'll end up just like him." Her hands shook as she showed the message to Jake, who had stayed the night in his truck just down the drive. He was furious, pacing the porch with a storm in his eyes. "They're trying to scare you off. That means we're close." Together, they pieced together the evidence. Chris's badge, the letter, the warehouse records, the threats, and the scar on Midnight's leg. Suddenly, it was all clear. Chris had discovered an illegal animal smuggling ring. Midnight had witnessed everything and paid the price for it. As dawn broke, Rachel stood in the pasture, Midnight pressing close. She felt fear, but also something stronger. "You saw it all, didn't you? You tried to protect him." Midnight's eyes met hers, full of pain and loyalty. Rachel called Jake. "We're not giving up," she said. "For Chris, for Midnight, for everyone who's been silenced." Jake's voice was resolute. "I'm with you, Rach. Let's finish this." The sun rose over the mountains, burning away the last of the fog. Rachel looked out across the fields, knowing there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, dangerous and bright as the morning light, and she was ready to chase it, wherever it led. For days, The threat hung over Rachel's life like a thundercloud, heavy and close, promising a storm. Jake visited the farm whenever he could, always watching the road, always carrying his service pistol. He warned Rachel to be careful, to answer the door for no one, and to lock every window at night. Rachel nodded, but the fear never left her. Even the horses in the next pasture seemed tense, spooked by the strange scents and movements that came with every sunset. Then the threats got louder. Jake started receiving anonymous phone calls at work, raspy voices warning him to drop the case or risk his career. Rachel's phone pinged day and night with text messages. "You're in over your head. Leave Asheville before it's too late. You'll lose more than a horse this time." The words seeped into her dreams, twisting them into nightmares of smoke and gunfire, of Chris's face slipping through her fingers like water. But if Rachel was afraid, Midnight was restless. Almost frantic, he paced the paddock for hours, nostrils flared, sweat darkening his black coat. At first, Rachel thought it was just the echoes of the past, but then she noticed something strange. Every evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees, Midnight would stand by the east fence, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the same patch of ground beneath a sprawling old oak. One afternoon, as Rachel was mucking the stalls, she heard a whinny, urgent, insistent. She dropped the pitchfork and hurried outside. Midnight was waiting by the oak, pawing at the earth. "What is it, boy?" she called, voice trembling. He answered with a sharp neigh, tossing his head toward the base of the tree. Rachel's hands shook as she approached. Midnight nickered softly, nudging her side with his nose, urging her forward. She knelt at the spot he'd indicated, heart pounding in her throat. The grass was flattened, the earth disturbed. Digging with her bare hands, she uncovered something soft and faded, a blue handkerchief, embroidered with Chris's initials, dirt-stained but unmistakable. Rachel gasped, clutching the fabric to her chest. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. The handkerchief still smelled faintly of her brother's aftershave, a ghostly reminder of everything she'd lost. Midnight stood over her, lowering his massive head until his forehead rested against her shoulder. "You never stopped looking for him, did you?" Rachel whispered, voice raw. "You tried to lead him home." For the first time, Rachel let herself cry, long, racking sobs that seemed to shake the very air. She clung to Midnight's neck, his presence a silent, steady anchor in the tide of her grief. When the tears finally stopped, Rachel noticed something else half buried in the mud, a small black plastic object glinting in the sunlight. She pried it loose, a USB drive sealed tight, covered in grime. Her hands trembled as she wiped it clean. She glanced at Midnight, who watched her intently, breath huffing through his nostrils. "Is this what you wanted me to find?" Jake arrived at the farm within the hour, drawn by Rachel's frantic call. Together they sat in the kitchen, staring at the USB drive as if it were a live grenade. Jake plugged it into his laptop, the screen flickering to life. The drive held a single folder labeled Evans. Inside were dozens of documents, scans of shipping manifests, police reports, and a series of grainy photographs. The images showed crates filled with rare and frightened animals, men in uniforms Rachel recognized as city officers loading boxes into unmarked trucks. At the end of the folder was a video file, shaky footage shot from ground level, showing Chris and Midnight cornered behind the warehouse by two men in masks. Rachel watched, breath held tight in her chest, as her brother tried to radio for help, his voice tense and urgent. Midnight reared, hooves flashing, trying to protect him. The men shouted, a struggle followed, and the camera went dark. In the last frame, Chris's voice rang out, clear, desperate. "Tell Rachel, don't let them win." Jake sat back in his chair, hands pressed to his face. "This is it, Rach. Proof of the animal smuggling ring. Proof they were using cops to move illegal shipments. No wonder they wanted Chris out of the way. He got too close." Rachel's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the files. Each document was a piece of the puzzle, each photo a new wound. The reality of what her brother had risked, what he'd suffered, washed over her in waves. She pressed her forehead to the table, Midnight's handkerchief clutched tight in her palm. Outside, a cold wind rattled the windows. Midnight paced the paddock, pausing now and then to look toward the house, as if he sensed the weight of the revelations inside. Later that night, as Rachel stood beneath the oak, USB drive in hand, she found herself speaking softly into the darkness. "You didn't fail him, Midnight. You saved the truth. You brought me to this. Chris wasn't alone. Neither are we." The horse pressed close, his breath warm against her cheek. Rachel wrapped her arms around his neck, letting his strength fill her up. "I'm not running anymore," she promised. "I'm going to finish what Chris started, and I'll make sure everyone knows what you did." In the stillness, Rachel felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. The fear was still there, but now it shared space with purpose. She would not let her brother's sacrifice or Midnight's loyalty be for nothing. As the stars blinked to life above the barn, Rachel wiped her tears, her resolve hardening like steel. The past would not win. The truth would be brought into the light. Rachel barely slept. The house felt colder now, as if the walls themselves knew something had changed. The evidence on the USB drive was enough to shake the city's foundations. She backed up the files 3 times. On her laptop, an old tablet, and an encrypted cloud drive, just in case. Jake insisted she keep everything hidden, reminding her again and again that desperate men could do desperate things. By morning, the farm was restless. Midnight paced the fence, nostrils flaring, tail lashing in agitation. Rachel sat on the porch steps, phone gripped tightly, watching the road. Every car that passed made her heart lurch. She knew they were being watched, knew somehow that their enemies were drawing close. The threats on her phone hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown more direct, more menacing. Last warning: sell the horse, leave town, or else. Mid-morning brought a sense of calm that was worse than the fear. Rachel found herself staring at the fields, wondering how her life had become this: a tangle of secrets, a battle she never asked to fight. She remembered Chris's laugh, his optimism, and tried to hold on to that. She remembered his last words to her: "Some souls need saving, even if it's hard." A truck rumbled up the drive, its engine loud in the quiet morning. Jake stepped out, his jaw set. "I checked the files," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. "We have everything we need, but I don't trust the station. Not all of them. This is bigger than us, Rach. Bigger than the department." He glanced at Midnight, then at Rachel. "You need to be careful today." Rachel nodded, nerves churning in her stomach. She tried to busy herself around the barn, feeding Midnight, mending a loose board, cleaning tack that hadn't seen use in months. Her mind spun with options. Take the evidence to the news, go to the state police, post it all online. Each possibility seemed risky, but doing nothing was no longer an option. Afternoon sun was dipping low when the confrontation finally came. Rachel was leading Midnight from the paddock when a car pulled into the drive, sleek, black, with windows tinted too dark for the country. 2 men stepped out, both in dark suits, their faces hard and unreadable. They walked straight for Rachel, eyes cold, every line of their posture radiating threat. "You Rachel Evans?" the taller man demanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. Rachel swallowed, refusing to step back. Midnight stood at her side, head high, muscles tense. "I am," Rachel said, her voice steady. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." The other man's gaze flicked to Midnight, lingering just a second too long. "This horse, that evidence, hand it over, walk away, and nobody gets hurt." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. She glanced at Midnight. He was still, but the look in his eyes was pure defiance. Rachel remembered Chris's words, echoing in her memory. The only way to heal is to face the truth. She drew a breath and stood her ground. "No, I know what you did to my brother. I know what you're hiding. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is he." The taller man sneered. "You really think anyone's going to believe you? You're a nobody, just like your brother was." Rachel shook her head, feeling a surge of courage. "Chris was 10 times the man you'll ever be, and he didn't die for nothing." She raised her voice, hoping Jake was within earshot. "The whole city will know what you did. I have proof, and I've made copies. If anything happens to me or to Midnight, it all goes public." The second man's face twisted, a flicker of uncertainty passing through his eyes. For a moment, the world held its breath. Suddenly, Midnight reared up, hooves striking the air, his powerful body blocking the men's path to Rachel. The men staggered back, hands darting to their belts. Jake burst from behind the barn, gun drawn, voice booming. "Step away from her! You're trespassing, and I've already called for backup." The men hesitated, weighing their odds. Then, in a flash of panic, they bolted back to their car, tires kicking up gravel as they sped down the drive. Rachel let out a long, shaking breath, dropping to her knees beside Midnight. She pressed her face to his neck, her relief mingling with adrenaline and gratitude. Jake rushed to her side, holstering his weapon. "You okay?" he demanded, voice rough. Rachel nodded, still clinging to the horse who had saved her yet again. They hurried inside. Jake locked every door and started making calls, first to a trusted contact at the state police, then to a reporter who owed Chris a favor. Rachel opened her laptop, her hands steady now, and uploaded the evidence everywhere she could think of: email, social media, cloud drives. Within minutes, the story began to spread. Photos, documents, video. The story of Chris Evans, Midnight, and the ring of corruption that had haunted their lives was suddenly public, beyond the reach of the men who'd tried to silence them. Within hours, Rachel's phone exploded with messages. Neighbors, journalists, even strangers from across the country offering support. Police sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder as backup finally arrived. Jake paced the kitchen, his relief tempered by exhaustion. Rachel watched the sun dip low over the farm, Midnight's silhouette tall and proud in the golden light. Rachel realized she'd made her choice. She had faced down her fear, risked everything, and refused to let evil win. She had chosen to fight for her brother, for the truth, for the horse who had never given up on her. As darkness fell, Rachel stood beside Midnight in the quiet, her voice soft but strong. "We did it. Chris, we did it. You're finally free." Midnight nickered, lowering his head so Rachel could rest her forehead against his. For the first time in a long while, she let herself hope. The battle was not yet over, but now the world was watching, and Rachel was no longer alone. It happened faster than Rachel could have imagined. Once the evidence was posted online, the story took on a life of its own. By the next morning, Rachel woke to the sound of voices outside. news vans lining the gravel drive, their antennas poking up like strange metal weeds. The Evans farm, once a quiet refuge, became the epicenter of a growing storm. Reporters crowded the front gate, shoving microphones toward anyone who got close, hungry for the next piece of the story that had gripped Asheville and was now spreading far beyond. Rachel barely had a moment to breathe. Jake stayed close, fielding calls from law enforcement and journalists, his phone constantly buzzing. Police cruisers rolled in and out, their blue lights swirling in the early sun. State investigators showed up, asking for copies of every document, every video file, every name she could remember. Rachel handed it all over, her voice growing steadier with every retelling. It was no longer just her story. It belonged to everyone Chris had tried to protect, everyone who'd been told to keep quiet, every animal and person that justice had overlooked. Inside, the house felt strangely empty, stripped of its usual peace. Rachel watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and sorrow. She'd won a battle, but it had cost her the life she'd known. She watched from the porch as Midnight paced restlessly in the paddock, his black coat shining, a living symbol for the town's headlines. The horse who knew too much. With every interview, Rachel felt the weight of her choices. She had given up her safety, her privacy, even her sense of home. Nights were no longer silent. Helicopters swept the fields, and unfamiliar faces peered through the fences. But every time she wavered, she remembered Chris's laugh and the sound of Midnight's hooves thundering across the field that first day. She remembered why she'd started all of this. One afternoon, after a day spent fielding questions and fending off cameras, Rachel sat in the empty barn with Midnight. The world outside hummed with noise, but in the shadows, it was just the two of them. She brushed Midnight's mane slowly, letting the rhythmic motion calm her battered nerves. "You did good, boy," she murmured. "You saved more lives than you'll ever know." Midnight pressed his nose into her shoulder, his breathing slow and steady. Rachel closed her eyes and leaned against him, feeling the solid, silent reassurance that had anchored her through every trial. But the threats had not disappeared. One evening, a rock shattered the kitchen window, landing on the table with a spray of glass. Tied around it was a strip of paper. "You should have listened." Jake insisted that Rachel and Midnight stay elsewhere until the police made more arrests. Reluctantly, Rachel agreed. She and Midnight moved to Dr. Lena Carter's property, an old friend's sprawling farm outside the city. Dr. Carter welcomed them without hesitation, setting up a stall in her quiet barn and a room for Rachel overlooking the fields. It wasn't home, but it was safe. The news followed them, but Lena kept reporters at bay and gave Rachel the space she needed to recover. Rachel spent long hours gazing out over the empty fields, missing her own land, her own routines. She grieved for the quiet she'd lost, for the version of herself who'd believed that some wounds could heal if you just gave them enough time. She missed Chris in new and sharper ways, longing to hear his voice just one more time, to ask if she'd done enough, if she'd honored his memory. Yet, through all the chaos and loss, there was a growing sense of purpose. Midnight, once called unadoptable, became the town's silent hero. People drove by Lena's farm just to catch a glimpse of him, the horse who had refused to be silenced. Children left letters on the fence, thanking Rachel and Midnight for being brave, for believing when no one else would. Rachel's story, and Midnight's, sparked conversations far beyond Asheville. Animal welfare groups called, asking if they could feature Midnight in their campaigns. Parents wrote to say their kids had found courage in the story of a broken horse and a determined woman. The world, once indifferent, was finally listening. But the biggest change was inside Rachel herself. She found, as the days passed, that the ache of loss was shifting. It didn't disappear, but it became something she could carry, a reminder of why she fought. She learned that the price of courage was steep, but so was the reward. The chance to make a difference, to speak for those who couldn't, to stand up even when afraid. One quiet evening, Rachel sat on Lena's porch, watching midnight graze in the golden light. Lena joined her, bringing 2 mugs of tea. "You've done a brave thing, Rachel," the older woman said softly. "Most folks would have turned away." Rachel stared into her cup. "I almost did, Lena. More times than I want to admit. But I kept thinking of Chris, what he would have done, what he'd want me to do for midnight. I think that's what loyalty is, standing up even when it hurts." Lena nodded, her eyes kind. "That's how healing starts, you know. You can't erase the pain. You can only walk through it, one day at a time. And you don't have to do it alone." As the stars came out, Rachel walked to the paddock and stroked Midnight's neck. He lifted his head, dark eyes shining in the moonlight. "Thank you, boy," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "For giving me a reason to fight. For never giving up, even when I wanted to." Midnight nickered, and for a moment, the world was quiet again. Rachel understood, finally, that the true cost of courage was never just about loss. It was about transformation, about letting go and starting over, about finding hope in the place where everything hurt the most. As she looked out over the fields, Rachel made a silent promise to speak out, to connect, to heal, and to help others find their way, just as Chris and Midnight had helped her. Months slipped quietly by, carrying with them the worst of the storm. The media moved on. The blue and red lights finally disappeared from Lena Carter's driveway, and Asheville found new headlines. But for Rachel and Midnight, a new chapter was just beginning. In the hush that followed the chaos, a sense of peace started to settle over them, cautious but real. The Evans farm, though scarred by all that had happened, began to heal. Rachel returned with Midnight one bright spring morning, the sky brilliant and cloudless, birdsong woven into the gentle breeze. The grass in the paddocks was taller than she remembered, the barn roof patched and solid once more thanks to Jake, Lina, and a handful of neighbors who had shown up to help. Quiet proof that the community cared more than Rachel had ever guessed. Midnight stepped from the trailer with easy grace, ears perked, nostrils flaring as he took in the familiar scents. Rachel led him slowly around the fence line, her hand resting on his strong neck. The place was theirs again, changed but not defeated. Rachel spent hours in the pasture, letting Midnight run free beneath the vast Carolina sky, feeling hope unfurl inside her with every stride he took. In time, Rachel found new purpose for the land and for herself. Inspired by Chris's memory and the journey she'd taken with Midnight, she joined Lina and a local group of veterans to launch a program called Healing Hooves. It was a simple idea: offer therapy and companionship to children and veterans struggling with trauma, using horses as gentle, powerful partners in recovery. The farm's gates swung wide every Saturday, and laughter began to echo where silence once lived. The first day, a small group arrived, some with nervous children clinging to their legs, others with the wary eyes of people unused to kindness. Rachel met them all at the gate, her smile soft but steady. She told them Midnight's story, not glossing over the pain, but showing how far he'd come. How much could be rebuilt with patience, trust, and love. One little girl, Lucy, stood out. She was no older than 7, her face pinched with anxiety, her hands knotted in her jacket sleeves. She refused to look at any of the horses, shrinking behind her mother each time one drew near. Rachel knelt down beside her, meeting her gaze with gentle understanding. "Would you like to meet Midnight?" she asked quietly. "He was scared too once. Maybe you could help each other." Lucy hesitated, then nodded. Just barely. Rachel led her to the fence, Midnight waiting on the other side. The black horse dipped his head, breath warm on Lucy's fingers. Rachel watched as the little girl's hand shook, then stilled, resting on Midnight's nose. After a moment, a shy smile flickered across Lucy's face. "He's soft," she whispered. Rachel blinked away tears, her heart full. Each week, more children came, more veterans seeking solace in the quiet strength of the horses. Rachel saw healing in small, steady steps. A boy who once flinched at every sound, now laughing as he brushed Midnight's mane. A man haunted by old battles closing his eyes, letting Midnight's heartbeat ground him in the present. The farm became a sanctuary for them all. The pain of the past no longer erased, but transformed into hope. Rachel's story became a beacon. She spoke at community meetings, at local schools, on radio programs, always sharing the same message. No one is too broken to heal as long as someone believes in them. She watched faces change as they listened, some skeptical, some moved, all touched by the story of a horse the world had given up on, and the woman who refused to let him go. One golden afternoon, Rachel rode Midnight across the pasture, the two of them silhouetted against the wide sky. The breeze was warm, wildflowers brushed their legs, and Rachel felt Chris's presence all around her. Not as a wound anymore, but as strength, as memory, as love. She laughed for the first time in what felt like years, the sound carrying over the fields. Later, as the sun dipped low and the Healing Hooves group gathered around the fire pit, Rachel shared her story again, this time not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she told them. "It's standing up again and again, even when you're scared. It's believing that tomorrow can be better than yesterday." She looked at Midnight, standing tall and proud, then at Lucy, who now hugged the horse without a trace of fear. "Midnight taught me that the wounds of the past don't have to close us off. They can open a new path for healing, for people, for animals, for all of us. So if you know someone who's struggling, don't turn away. Be the one who gives them another chance." Applause and laughter rippled through the group, and Rachel felt her heart soar. For the first time since Chris's death, she felt whole. Not because the pain had vanished, but because she'd found purpose in the aftermath. She'd fought for truth, for justice, for a broken horse and a lost brother, and discovered that hope could grow from even the hardest ground. As night fell, Rachel walked the pastures one last time. Midnight followed, his breath soft against her cheek, his presence steady as ever. The stars winked into being above the farm, and Rachel smiled, feeling peace settle over her at last. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Chris, for everything. I'll keep going. I'll keep believing." In the final rays of sunset, Rachel mounted Midnight and rode across the open field, laughter and hope ringing in the air. The farm, the town, even the world beyond, all changed by the courage of one lost horse and the family who refused to give up. And with every new dawn, Rachel and Midnight stood ready, to heal, to help, to remind others that no matter how deep the wounds of the past, loyalty and courage could always open a new path forward.